Well, earlier, to understand more, I spoke to Ms. Yasmin Sooka, who's the chair of the Commission on Human Rights in South Sudan. And I began by asking her for her thoughts on what factors were standing in the way of the government's democratic transition.
The first is, of course, I think political will on the part of political elites who, in fact, have not committed to implementing many of the key provisions of the revitalized peace agreement. The second is the government hasn't set up a permanent constitution, which would really be the definition of a social contract between the government and its own people, and which will also reflect really what it means to be South Sudanese. The third is the implementation of the transitional justice mechanisms, which were set out in Chapter 5 of the revitalized peace agreement.
How did the authorities respond to some of the findings?
They haven't denied that the violations, as we documented them, have not been verified. But what the government tried to say is that, in fact, they have set up some institutions to actually deal with a range of issues. I'm afraid it could become tools which are simply politicized or dusted away until the next session of the Human Rights Council.
If the recommendations from your report are not implemented, what are you most worried about then?
The conflict is flaring up in many other parts of the country. And in the last few days, you've also seen skirmishes between the forces of the IO and, in fact, government forces. If the government doesn't actually deal with this question of the unification of forces, we actually fear that South Sudan may return to a place of conflict again, and that it will be as deadly as it was in 2013 and 2016. But our biggest fear is that, in fact, you're going to see fighters being recruited from South Sudan to actually fight on both sides in the north.
You know, the report also highlighted extrajudicial killings, disappearances, sexual crimes as well. Tell us more about that and what would need to be done for the victims and their families to get justice.
We, in fact, raised this question with the Minister of Gender, and she made it very clear, as somebody who only receives 1% of the total budget in South Sudan, she's unable to fund salaries in her own department, let alone to fund and support these one-stop centers. And in the absence of that, women and girls will not be able to have access to medical care. They will not be able to receive psychosocial support. And, the other thing that we have picked up is that the rate of women who are being abducted, trafficked, and sold as sexual slaves is on the increase. I mean, you have auctions in some parts of the country.